What if the research indicated there was an inexpensive breathing exercise device that, if utilized about 5 minutes a day, could significantly reduce blood pressure and improve exercise performance? Resisted breathing, or what the science refers to as inspiratory muscle strength training, or IMST, it's not new. I remember reading about it a decade ago, but at the time, it appeared to be all fluff. Our intercostal breathing muscles are almost never utilized to capacity. So who cares if we strengthen them? Well, fast forward that decade or so, and it turns out we might all care. Whether you or a loved one has high blood pressure and would like to access options beyond just medications, or you're a runner, triathlete, swimmer, or cyclist looking to optimize your performance, IMST might be worth a closer look. Today, we'll take that closer look with Dr. Daniel Craighead, whose groundbreaking work in this area is both fascinating and eye-opening. I've been fiddling with this over the last 6 weeks or so in preparation for the interview, and I'm seeing some stuff, folks. So I'm very interested. I'm seeing it from a running perspective. We're going to dig into the full spectrum of how it's helping our health, blood pressure, and our fitness performance. Dr. Craighead is a leading exercise physiologist and cardiovascular health researcher at the University of Minnesota. He focuses on innovative, time-efficient interventions to combat age-related declines in cardiovascular and metabolic health. His research in this area is fascinating, and we're going to talk about it. Today, he joins the coaching lab to unpack how this simple, science-based technique is reshaping approaches to both peak performance and everyday health. If this is your first time joining us, I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute, the nation's top-rated health and wellness coach certification program. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for making the coaching lab part of your week. Speaking of coaching, if you've been considering pursuing a career as a health and wellness coach, or adding this MBHWSC-approved certification to your toolbox as a physical or occupational therapist, counselor, physician, nurse, or some related role, registration for our next cohort is available now. Reach out anytime. It's a big decision, so reach out. Happy to talk about it. Results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. That's results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And one of our coaches, not some salesperson, is happy to set us some time to answer your questions directly. And now, it's time to take a deep breath and jump in with Dr. Daniel Craighead on the latest episode of the Coaching Lab podcast. Dr. Craighead, good to have you here. I mentioned to you offline, I was a skeptic about this coming in. I've read the research, including much of what you sent me in terms of what's out there, and I'm really curious now. So thank you for jumping on to clear all this up. We're going to be talking about both the health side and the performance side. So welcome to the Coaching Lab.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And like a true scientist, I'm a bit of a skeptic too. So I'll try to give you, the what we know, what we don't know, what we still need to figure out.
Love it. Love it. Well, let's give folks the intro. I talked about what this is called. It's this inspiratory muscle strength training, but how does it differ from just breathing exercises? And what led you into this in the first place?
Yeah. So I'll probably call it IMST.
That's
for
great.
short.
I like that.
Muscle strength training. Yeah, so IMST is different from like slow, deep breathing exercises in that we're using an external device to provide resistance when we breathe in. So you basically have a handheld device, you put your lips over it and inhale, and there's usually a valve or something in that device that won't open until you produce enough pressure. So that means you have to really focus, you have to really contract your diaphragm and those other muscles you use for breathing. And in that way, it's, basically like lifting weights, but for the muscle is used to inhale. So instead of that slow, controlled, deep breathing that you might do if you're meditating or something like that, these are powerful contractions when you're inhaling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mentioned in the intro, I've tried this out for the last 6 weeks. So it is forceful. Like I had it all the way down at the very, very basic level when I started, and it was not easy to do. Does it matter for folks that are eventually going to say, oh, I want to check this out, and they try this? Does posture matter? Does it matter if you're upright? Does it matter if you're sitting, standing, laying down? Are there any little minor things like that we need to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think either sitting or standing is okay with kind of an upright posture. As you mentioned, it's really challenging. So what I've seen people do is they'll kind of start arching their back or kind
Yeah.
of rearing back forcefully to increase the force they can produce. A little bit of that's okay, but a little too much could maybe even lead to kind of some
Some
strains in the
necks.
neck or
Yeah.
the back. So avoiding, whipping your whole body around, but an upright posture is the way we recommend it.
Perfect. And what led you into this? You're a runner. You're an athlete. You've been studying this now for several years. How did that? What was the genesis of that?
Yeah, so you're right. I'm a runner. I'm an athlete. I've always been interested in the science of how our bodies work when we're exercising. So I went to Penn State to get my PhD in kinesiology. While there, I was really interested and focused on high blood pressure, hypertension, and kind of how can we use exercise as a way to improve our cardiovascular health and lower blood pressure. After finishing my degree at Penn State, I transitioned to the University of Colorado. And right about the time I was making that transition, which was sort of late 2016, early 2017, some research came out of Dr. Fiona Bailey's laboratory at the University of Arizona. And she was doing IMST, which consisted of 30 resisted breaths a day in patients with obstructive sleep apnea. So sleep apnea is a patient group where you stop breathing at night. It makes some intuitive sense that if you improve the strength of their respiratory muscles, maybe their sleep apnea symptoms will improve. And in her initial studies, Dr. Bailey's lab didn't necessarily see a big improvement in sleep apnea, but in these patients, their blood pressure dropped dramatically.
Interesting.
So that caught our attention in Colorado. And we were wondering, is this benefit something specific to people with sleep apnea? Because there's a lot else going on with those people. Or can we apply it to sort of the general healthy population who has blood pressure that's higher than we want? And then along with blood pressure, are there other benefits this could have for the cardiovascular system? So it was her work that got our eyes set on this and really started our research on it, about 8 years ago now.
And we were talking offline about the number of people potentially impacted by this. There's unlikely a single person listening to this who does not have a loved one or a friend or themselves based on the numbers. I think you said somewhere in the ballpark of 60% of adults over 50 have high blood pressure. So do the math. There's someone in your life that this is a significant, if it's not you. So very, very fascinating. Why is it that training the muscles we use to breathe can lower blood pressure? How does that improve heart health? What are the physiological mechanisms that are at play with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
We're still trying to figure out exactly how it works. And I get this question a lot. And what I usually tell people to start is that we don't even necessarily know all the ways that running is good for us. We know some of the ways, but these most basic forms of exercise, we're still figuring out everything going on with them. The same is true with IMST. We're figuring out exactly how it works, but we think there's a couple different things it could be doing. So your breathing is very linked to your sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response. And in a lot of people with high blood pressure, that sympathetic nervous system activity is chronically high. So that's a reason that they have high blood pressure. It's a reason that doing slow, deep breathing exercises can lower blood pressure. So it's likely that this shorter duration, higher intensity resisted breathing also impacts that fight or flight response, kind of turns it down. And that could be a way that it's lowering blood pressure. We also have evidence showing that it's probably causing the release of something into the circulation, into our blood, that's helpful for us. So taking it back to running and other common forms of exercise again, when you do those types of exercise, the active muscles release things into our bloodstream that communicate with the rest of our systems and kind of improve our health. We suspect something similar is happening with IMST, so likely the diaphragm, when it's contracting so forcefully during these exercises, which you don't really get any other time in daily life. It's releasing maybe something unique that's spreading throughout the body and helping our heart and blood vessels. But we're still trying to narrow down the exact how. I think it's probably a lot of things. Right now, the evidence is stronger for that it does lower blood pressure, but we're still trying to figure out all the ways it does it.
And then one of your studies mentioned the vascular endothelial function improving. Can you explain what this is in layman's terms and why it matters?
Yeah, so the vascular endothelium is a single layer of cells that makes up the inner lining of all of our blood vessels. So it's that layer between your blood and your body. So it's very, important when we're talking about cardiovascular health. And it's a non-traditional cardiovascular disease risk factor, meaning it's something that you don't generally look at in the doctor's office because it's hard to measure. But in the research laboratory, we know that it's really important for cardiovascular health. With aging, how well these cells work tends to decline, and that can contribute to the risk of developing cardiovascular diseases, having a heart attack, things like that. Because these cells, they control how wide our blood vessels are. So you want blood vessels that can widen when they're supposed to and accommodate more blood flow. And they also prevent kind of that atherosclerotic process where those cells get into your blood vessels and kind of cause plaque buildup. So a healthy endothelium prevents that from happening. So in our study, we did 6 weeks of IMST, and we found that the function of those cells also improved along with lowering blood pressure. So that could be another benefit that if someone did this in the long run, their risk for cardiovascular disease might go down.
So let's look at the blood pressure piece more specifically. Your 2021 study, this IMST led to a significant drop. From memory, it seems like it was 9 or 10 points in 6 weeks. How does that compare to they get on the bike for 3 times a week, or they do start a walking program? If that's the trade-off, how do those 9, 10 points, if I'm remembering it right, compare to more traditional recommendations from our docs?
Yeah, so you're correct. It was a 9-point reduction in systolic blood pressure. And that is kind of on the upper end of what we see with other types of exercise.
Upper end.
Running, upper end.
Interesting.
So at least as effective as what's seen with running, cycling. I think something to keep in mind with the research here is the research I've done on IMST, the research other labs have done showing that it lowers blood pressure. These are all sort of smaller, highly controlled trials where we can make sure people are doing the training and doing it correctly. A lot more research has been done on cycling per se that maybe are less controlled but more applicable to real life. So you may not see the same blood pressure reductions in a study that has more real world sort of action going on. Exactly. So when we do it, and we know people are doing it right, it causes a significant reduction in blood pressure that's at least as large as other forms of exercise. As this research moves more into public health, we'll see what happens if the effectiveness remains that high. But at least kind of as a proof of concept, it stands up very well to other types of exercise. It even stands up pretty well to kind of initial medication doses someone might get to lower their blood pressure.
Okay, so as you were talking, I was picturing your control over those doing the aerobic choice. You're talking about you're controlling the use of this breathing technique, and it's so simple. As I mentioned, I've been doing it for 6 weeks. It just sits next to my computer. I have it on my calendar, and I just, in the morning and in the afternoon, and I don't count, and maybe I'm doing this wrong, but I counted how long it takes me for 30 inhalations. It's about 2.5 to 3 minutes. So I just set my stopwatch. I start and go from there. Are you concerned that people actually can't find 3 minutes?
Well,
for that kind of a benefit? I mean, you can, and folks, we're not saying get off your blood pressure meds. So I'm not saying that, but as an alternative, potentially under a physician's approval, 3 minutes twice a day?
Yeah, I'm not concerned that people won't be able to find the time. In our research, we were only doing even 1 time a day, and we saw these benefits.
Yeah.
As you alluded to, though, it's really challenging. You're a highly motivated person, knows a lot about health. I worry about people who are not getting the instruction from investigators like myself, doing it at a high enough intensity to get the benefit.
Okay.
Because, you finish those 30 breaths, it's pretty challenging. So I think people, if they were just to pick it up on their own, try what we do, they probably wouldn't train at that level that we're having our research volunteers train at.
Got it.
So
that makes sense.
I expect there's an intensity trade-off, and maybe that's where it would come from.
Right.
Something else you said, you just said we're not telling people to get off their blood pressure meds. That's totally true. I don't look at IMST as the trade-off of should you run or should you do IMST.
Yes. Thank you.
There's a lot of things that IMST won't do that, other types of exercise does. It won't help with body weight maintenance. It's not going to help with bone mineral density.
Yes.
We haven't seen improvement in like cholesterol. What we're targeting this at is people who can't or won't do kind of the current exercise recommendations, which is a majority of people in the United States. They don't meet current exercise guidelines. So if you're doing nothing, this is probably better than doing nothing. And if you're already doing something and want to find something to add, IMST is such a unique physiological stimulus because you're never working your respiratory muscles this way. Never. Maybe there's an added benefit if you're already active and you want to try to get even more.
Well, and that was my skepticism. My background, I was a physical therapist for years. So the intercostal muscles, I thought, they never are used to full capacity. Why would this benefit? Well, that's not the issue. There's other things that it's affecting. One of the questions that seems to pop up a lot, do the blood pressure benefits of doing this, do they last? And maybe you haven't studied this yet, but do they last after the person stops, or do we know that yet?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And in our 2021 study, we did actually look at that a little bit. So people did 6 weeks of training, and then we took their training devices away from them, and they went back to their previous lifestyle for 6 weeks. And then they came back and we measured their blood pressure again. And remember, we initially saw that 9-point reduction in systolic blood pressure. After 6 weeks of no training, they still had about a 7-point reduction compared to where they started. So there was a long-lasting effect. Now, of the published studies, there's now 6 or 7 different studies from multiple labs showing that sort of initial about 9-point reduction in systolic blood pressure. We're so far the only study that's shown that prolonged effect. So as myself, a skeptical scientist, I want to see that replicated in someone else's work before I hang my hat on that. So, potentially there's a long-lasting effect. There's some initial evidence that there could be, which would be great that maybe you could do this intermittently. And again, that could promote adherence, which is really what we're going for. We're testing that in our ongoing studies to see if it's real. There's some other labs doing it as well. So to be determined on that point.
But at a minimum, for someone that maybe is retired, they're traveling a little bit, they forget their device, that's okay. If you miss a week, it's not like you ruined everything you've done. We know that it's sustained for at least a period of time.
That's right. I would say so.
Yeah, very cool. Let's jump into the fitness side a little bit. The 2024 paper you sent me, you found significant improvements in treadmill time. Folks, as I'm saying this out loud, it doesn't make any sense. So, Doc, you're going to have to fill us in. So you found significant improvements in treadmill time, ventilatory efficiency, and submaximal exercise economy. What the heck? Like, why is this happening with the 3-minute breathing technique?
Yeah. Now, this IMST for cardiovascular health has not been that widely studied. People have been doing resisted breathing of various types for exercise performance for a while. And we're starting to see this sort of same pattern emerge. So when you're doing aerobic exercise, your heart rate goes up, the blood flow, your heart is pumping, goes up in order to send more blood to your active muscles. So we had our volunteers on the treadmill. So they're trying to pump blood to their legs so that they can walk or run vigorously.
Okay.
The other muscles that are active are the muscles used for respiration, for breathing. So when you start running really hard, you start breathing heavy, your diaphragm, your intercostals, they're having to work harder to increase that ventilation. Our body can't send as much blood to all the muscles as the muscle would like. So your legs, when you're running, they would love to get more blood flow than
Yes,
you're
they
sending
would.
them. But your heart is just limited in how much it can get out. So you're sending more blood flow to the respiratory muscles, you're sending more blood flow to the legs. And your body has to decide where to prioritize. So breathing is pretty important for our survival. So there's some priority of blood flow going to the diaphragm, and that limits how much blood flow is going to your legs. If we train the respiratory muscles, we can make those muscles more efficient, meaning now they don't need the same amount of blood flow for the same amount of work. So let's say you were running at 10-minute miles. Then you did IMST for 6 weeks. You run at that same 10-minute mile pace. Less blood is going to be going to your respiratory muscles to accommodate that pace because we've improved their efficiency. All that extra blood now can go to your legs. So now you're able to improve your exercise performance, not because you've improved necessarily your VO2 max, but because we've redistributed where your blood can go and improve that type of performance.
Wow. So, all right. So I sent you an email prior just so that it wasn't coming out of the blue. I've been doing this about 6 weeks, and on my little Garmin thing, I generally sit 60 to 63 or whatever for their VO2 max rating. We know that's not accurate. It's not been done in a lab. There's some connection, but it's not a real number. Since I started doing this breathing, it just keeps going up and up and up. And at first I was joking with somebody about, oh yeah, haha, it's at 67 now. Yesterday it hit 76. I'm 59 years old. I don't have a VO2 max of 76. We know that. Let's not pretend like I do. But that's a massive jump from 62 to 76. Is that just a false reading that we're throwing off through this breathing technique? Or I don't know. What are your thoughts on the oddity of that anomaly?
Yeah, so there's probably some truth to this. So your watch, the Garmin, is trying to estimate your VO2 max based on your heart rate and kind of how fast you're moving. How much effort are you putting into going a certain speed? Right. So it's that same process that we just talked about. If we're making your respiratory muscles more efficient, now your heart doesn't need to pump blood to those muscles as much anymore. So you could run the same speed at a lower heart rate, or you could run a faster speed at the same heart rate. And that's going to be a real change in your running. It's an actual improvement. Something to especially keep in consideration for you. You're talking to me from Fort Collins, Colorado. You're about at a mile of altitude.
Right.
The respiratory kind of requirements at altitude are greater than those for people who are at sea level. So the air's thinner. You have to move more volume in order to get enough oxygen. So it's an extra stress on the respiratory muscles. So people living at moderate altitude like yourself might see especially, a larger benefit from this type of training because the respiratory muscles during exercise are under more kind of stress and strain. That research study you quoted, that was done in Boulder, Colorado as well. So we'll see if that happens at sea level. Other investigators have done similar studies and shown that, it probably happens at sea level too. We haven't tested our exact protocol, but I think the reason you could be seeing this dramatic change is in part where you live, where there is kind of a greater respiratory stress than the average person's under.
Interesting. Yeah, the thing that triggered me to try this out, I don't know if you know Daniel Rowland or Brady Homer, but they both do some excellent work on the research side related to running, and they both on consecutive weeks highlighted a couple of studies on how this would work, and the Boulder happened to be that week. And I never think about my breathing being an issue. And as you've run the Boulder, I'm sure, and as you run up into the stadium, that last 0.2 or whatever, I thought maybe my breathing, like I could feel it. Well, I was thinking about it. So it was just funny the way those all linked together. Okay, so that makes me wonder, and I'm throwing this to you from left field, so you may say, I have no idea, Brad. but all the conversation about zone 1 and zone 2. So let's say I had dialed in my easy runs at up to, 121 beats per minute. And now I've been doing this for 6 weeks, and my easy runs at that same speed are coming in at 109, 110. Again, I'm asking you to stretch here. You haven't studied this, but do you run faster to stay at that 118 to 121 range? Or do you say, nope, I've readjusted, my easy zone is now in that 110, 112 range?
If you're asking me, I probably run a little bit faster to get my heart rate back up. Now, I want that benefit for my cardiovascular system, the improvement that we see with our heart for being able to pump more blood. So I would say run a little faster at the same heart rate. Yeah. So like you said, it's a complex issue. I can see other people disagreeing with me.
Sure.
But I think, it lets you run a little bit faster at the same effort. And it's not all going to happen at once, right? Like you start doing it on day one, and then it's not like 6 weeks later, everything magically happens. Right. It's going to happen over time, and you'll sort of be naturally progressing as the pace becomes more comfortable.
Right. Well, I know that question's sitting out there with the runners and the cyclists and the swimmers, triathletes listening to us. So there you go, folks. Now you can run faster at the same zone. All right. So despite no change in VO2 max, participants reported improved exercise tolerance. You've touched on this, but what does that tell us about the importance of breathing efficiency versus raw aerobic capacity?
Right. So what we actually saw in the laboratory, we had people doing VO2 max tests where they were on the treadmill, and we kept the speed constant, but the grade on the treadmill just kept getting steeper and steeper.
Okay.
And they went until they couldn't go any longer.
Okay.
These tests take about 10 minutes to do. And we had people at the end of the 6 weeks of IMST staying on the treadmill for like over a minute longer. And keep in mind, that minute is at the end of the test when they're at the steepest grade.
And so this was not a training effect. This was not a fitness training effect. This was an IMST. Their training was the same throughout this period.
Correct. And we didn't really have athletes in this study. These were normal adults from Boulder, Colorado. So they're people who are pretty active, but we didn't recruit the significant master athlete population there. But they did keep their normal physical activity the same.
Okay.
And we had a control group that was doing the same intervention, but at a low intensity.
There you go. Okay.
And that group didn't see the benefit. But basically, people were able to stay on the treadmill longer and go to a higher workload. And we think that's because that blood flow could be redistributed from the respiratory muscles to the legs. It didn't impact the overall amount of oxygen they were able to use, which is why VO2 max itself didn't change. But they were able to get to this higher workload. We also saw that at earlier workloads, so not at that final stage, at submaximal workloads, the amount of oxygen they were using went down. So that's improved exercise efficiency or economy. So if you're someone who's in a race, you're competing in an endurance event, what this suggests to us is that you would be able to maintain a higher speed at the same oxygen uptake, right? That's going to be a performance booster. It's the same as the question you asked me of, if my heart rate's lower, should I run faster or not? If you take the should or shouldn't you out for your everyday training, when you're in competition, yes, you should be going faster.
Right.
So you should be able to go faster in a long endurance event because you're using less oxygen at sort of those submaximal workloads that you'll be at for things like 10K races and longer.
Is everyone using this now? Like as you're talking, I'm just thinking, I love to run, but I'm not paid to run. It seems like 100% of people that are the super serious have got to be using. Are we there yet, or is the word not out?
I don't think we're there yet. Like yourself, I was skeptical. I didn't necessarily think we'd see as big of effects as we have observed thus far. And I think that skepticism plays over into, the athletic community. I think it's also hard to show benefits in elite athletes, right? The study I did, that's in adults in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. and we saw this big improvement. If you're someone who's an elite or highly trained athlete, your benefit is not going to be as large as what we saw
Of course,
in these
with
people.
anything.
Right. And you also, you may not care if, oh, my treadmill tolerance time has gone up. What does that mean for race performance? There's a little bit of a disconnect there. So I think, there's stuff we can do that would be more applicable to the elite athletes. If you're a mile runner, if you can improve by, and you're an elite runner, if you can improve by 1 or 2 seconds, that's huge.
It's massive.
But we're never going to be able to do a study that shows that because there's so many other things going on to show such a small effect. We don't have enough low 4-minute milers who would be in a research study where we can prove that.
But wouldn't a high school track team love to jump into a study like that?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I mean, as a coach, it seems like you'd be all over that.
And here's where I come at it. I'm a scientist. I love when things are proven by the data and well-controlled studies, but I'm also an avid endurance athlete. And I think of the things you could do, adding on a few minutes a day of this respiratory training, right? The devices are relatively affordable. You can get them for less than a pair of running shoes cost. You're going to take a few extra minutes a day. You're not going to get an overuse injury, right? You're not loading your legs anymore. As long as you don't do anything crazy, you're probably not going to get like a musculoskeletal injury. So, even if you're getting a potential of a small benefit, the risk is really low for a potentially high performance reward. So worst off, you're out, $50, $75 and 3 to 5 minutes a day.
Right.
Best case scenario, you've got that performance boost and now you're able to beat your rival who's been beating you the last couple of years. So if I'm an athlete looking for something to do, I certainly would add this on, with the knowledge that like, hey, with our science, we haven't really been able to show that yet, but I do it personally. I think it helps. Could it all be placebo effect? Sure. But I think the risk reward payoff is good for athletes.
And what have you been tracking in yourself? Are there some data points that might be interesting that other people could be tracking? For me, it's just been noticing my easy runs are about, 5 to 7 beats lower at the same speed, and that silly Garmin VO2 max numbers gone through the roof. Are there other things that resting heart rate or ventilatory rate during tempo runs, or are there other things that you're seeing in yourself that someone else without a lab could be tracking in themselves?
Yeah, it's, somewhat subjective, but I feel like my respiratory effort at running speeds have definitely changed, especially when I was in Boulder. I know that exact hill you're talking about in Boulder. Done the race, run up it plenty of
Come around the
times.
corner. Yep.
Yeah. And I think efforts like that, I saw a pretty, what I felt like a pretty clear change in, okay, here's how I was breathing before versus here how I'm breathing now if you're doing this training regularly. And respiratory effort plays a lot into how our bodies monitor fatigue. So if you're not breathing as hard, you feel a lot better and are going to perform better. Again, that's pretty subjective, but for me, I felt like the effect was large enough to be noticeable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I need to hold this episode and not release it until the season's over this year, so none of my friends get a chance to hear it. Okay, you've answered this next question. Clearly, we should get this out there. Compliance rate for your studies over 90%. Why do you think? I guess, is it just the ease of it? Why is it so much better? Because we never see those kinds of numbers with almost anything, but especially with aerobic exercise.
Right. Yeah, I think it was 94%, and that's a great starting point. But here's what to know about the design of our study. People came to the research lab. We did our baseline testing on them. We showed them how to do IMST. Then they did their first training session with us. Then they went home and they did 5 of their training sessions each week alone. And then they'd come back weekly for a supervised session, and their respiratory strength would improve. We'd increase the resistance they were training at, sort of standard progression. but that meant they were seeing us weekly for 6 weeks. So they had this kind of constant reminder to be training, because when they came back each week, we also checked their training device to see how well they adhered. We were using these electronic devices. It stored training session data. So they knew if they skipped out all week, we were going to know it. So
dang accountability.
Yeah, exactly. So if we had seen really low rates of adherence with that study design, then we'd be concerned about, hey, we're not going to see adherence when this goes out into the real world. So that 90+% is a great starting point. Now we need to move this more out of the research clinic and more into the public health domain, and we'll see how adherence changes. That being said, it is so time efficient and easy to do that I do think if you get in that habit, adherence is pretty high. You can do this in under 5 minutes a day. You have it, somewhere where you're going to use it every day. Maybe it's next to your toothbrush and that becomes part of your morning routine. You do the training, you brush your teeth, you're ready to go. So because it's a small device, you can take it with you when you travel, or it doesn't take up a lot of room in your house, doesn't take a lot of time. I think there's a lot of things there that make it so people can adhere.
Yeah. Put it with your remote, folks. And you can be doing something else. That could be the time that you check your social media. That could be the time that you're, like you say, stack it on top of something you're already doing. It's just so simple. How does somebody get started? What would you recommend? What kind of device or routine would you suggest? I went with the Power Breathe brand. We have no connection with them, folks. We'll have a link to the one that I am using in the show notes, but we don't have a connection with them. But would you suggest certain brands or how to get started, or do you start with less than 30? Just walk us through some at-home tips, if you will.
Yeah, and in my research studies as well, I've also primarily used Power Breathe. They've given me discounts on buying their devices for my research, but they don't fund any of my studies.
Okay.
But those are the ones I'm most familiar with. So we've seen those effects in the laboratory. So that's a brand I am comfortable recommending. In general, what I say people want to look for when they buy these devices is something that can provide a high enough level of resistance. So if you go on Amazon, you search for these sort of breathing trainers, the cheapest ones, they don't go up to a very high level. So when we talk about resistance for breathing, we use the units of centimeters of water. And we'll have people training in the laboratory above 100 centimeters of water. And some of these training devices that are the cheapest go up to 25, 30 centimeters of water is their maximal setting.
Yeah.
So I would say buy one that gets you at least to like 150, 200 centimeters of water. For most people, that will be all you need. The price point does go up a little bit. You can get sort of the most basic devices for $75. And if you want all the bells and whistles that are electronic and store everything, you can spend $1,000 if you want, and everything in between. But the basic one should be just fine. Look for one that gets you in that 150, 200 centimeter of water range, and you should be good to go. What we've done in our lab is a 30 breath a day, working up to 75% of sort of maximal resistance. Now it's hard to measure sort of what your one rep max is in the real world. But basically, we settled on that intensity because that's sort of what we saw people could get to 30 breaths with, like the maximum resistance. So if we went higher, people got fatigued a lot sooner. If you went lower, people got to 30 breaths and still
no problem.
Were able to do, they could do more. So I recommend people kind of play around with it. Start at a low intensity, do 30 breaths, crank the intensity up a little bit the next day, do 30 breaths. And once you get to that point where 30 breaths is kind of like, okay, maybe I could have done one or two more, but then I wouldn't have been able to get that valve open. That's where you stop, stay there for 1 or 2 weeks, and it becomes easy. Crank the resistance up, a little bit more. Sometimes, especially in kind of the older adults I've studied, it's hard even to get to 30 breaths, at all for them. So we do build in rest breaks. It's okay to kind of do it more interval style. So 6 breaths consecutively that are resisted and then a minute rest, 6 more resisted breaths and then a minute rest. It's okay to do it that way if it helps you get the intensity up. So that's what we've done. And then another protocol that's commonly followed is the twice a day at kind of 50% effort protocol, which has been shown athletically to have a lot of the same benefits. Not as much research on like the heart health aspect has been done yet, but that's 30 breaths in the morning, 30 breaths at night, sort of more often continuously, but in an effort that's fairly challenging. Either of those should work, but it's just kind of like how you would prescribe the exercise for anyone who's new to something. Start low and build up, and then once you get to the spot where it's challenging, stay there for a bit until your body adapts.
And be prepared for some little oddities. I remember when I first started, like you say, you do a pretty hard intake, and I noticed even like back of my neck was, next day I was like, oh yeah, I use my neck a little different than I normally do, because normally it just sits in front of the computer. So you may notice some little minor things like that.
And we did see that in our study. People reported, some neck muscle soreness and a little bit of lightheadedness after training. Those things tended to happen early in the training program and then kind of go away. Yeah. The other thing I will say is that don't go too fast. So some of the devices out there are paced, which is great. That will keep you from kind of going faster than you should. But a lot of the more affordable devices, you're kind of on your own. And I think people have a tendency to sort of do it with a fast breathing pattern. But I think the exhale should be slow. So the inhale is going to be like a real fast, powerful, done over a second maybe. That exhale then, nice, slow, minimum of 2 seconds, 2 to 4 seconds. And that keeps you from hyperventilating and getting dizzy. So take your time exhaling, fast and powerful on the inhale. Don't just do rapid fire breaths. That's not the way to go.
Yeah, that's a good reminder, because that'd be very easy to do. Where do you see the future of IMST heading? What could it be? Do you see it in some places already becoming a standard part of programs like stretching and training, and coaches that are just making this available to their athletes on a regular basis, and or physicians providing this as an alternative?
Yeah, so I think,
or an add-on.
There's a lot of research that we're doing now. So we're expanding this out into other groups who have sort of heart complications and who have high blood pressure. So I'm associated with groups doing this in patients with chronic kidney disease. That's a group that tends to have an increased cardiovascular disease risk, and will it help them? There's interest in cancer survivors, because chemotherapy is critical for treating cancer, but it ravages your cardiovascular system. So if you're a child or young adult who's gone through treatment for cancer, you need something that's affordable and sustainable over the course of your life in order to prevent cardiovascular disease. So our research, we're trying to kind of build out and see what other groups might this be helpful for. And then we're also kind of, as I mentioned a couple times, trying to build from the laboratory into the real world. So how can we take this from, hey, I, as an investigator, the people in my lab, we've shown you how to do it, which doesn't have a broad reach, to how can someone across the country from me pick this up and follow our protocol? It sounds pretty simple. It is fairly simple, but I've also trained a lot of people on this personally, and the things people do the first time they try can be a little interesting. So I do think there is a little bit of skill involved. So I would like to see a system like a smartphone app, which provides instructions on how to do this training, that can kind of administer the protocol and say, hey, remember to train today, remember to increase your resistance, and include the blood pressure component. So someone has a home blood pressure monitor, it can feed into that as well, and they can monitor their blood pressure. So I'd like to see some avenues for broad dissemination. As far as what's happening now, I've certainly been contacted by physicians and exercise professionals who are interested in using this with their patients or clients. And I tell them a lot of the same things that we've talked about today, that we've seen that it's safe. We've seen effectiveness in these really controlled settings. Here's what we don't necessarily know. And I think some people have started using it with their patients or clients, and it's certainly not widespread yet, though. And I think it's because the evidence we have is pretty strong, but these are all short duration, relatively small clinical trials to this point. These are not the thousands of people, multi-year studies that really tell you, do people have fewer heart attacks when they do this?
Right.
We're looking at kind of biomarkers for disease risk, the level of evidence that I think we need to actually get it widespread in public health guidelines. So a lot of physicians are recommending it, are those larger studies that really show the hard outcomes. So, we're following the research process. We're working on it. Hopefully we have a high enough level of evidence soon to support such a large investment to do one of those big studies. And we'll follow where the results take us. So far it looks promising. We'll keep doing more research and keep reporting on what happens.
Any circling back on the sleep apnea piece, as you were saying, talking about that original study that drew you to this, my brain was just like, oh my gosh, yes, that could, but they didn't. Has there been any follow-up to show there could be benefits? It makes such logical sense.
For sleep apnea in particular?
Yeah.
So Dr. Bailey's lab now is doing one of the most ambitious studies on IMST, and I think they're close to wrapping up. They're doing a 6-month intervention in sleep apnea patients. That will be the longest study I'm aware of. So they're looking at the cardiovascular health markers. I'm assuming they're getting some sleep apnea measures as well. So stay tuned, but I think that will be one of the more definitive studies one way or another when it comes out.
And as you've chatted with her, any pre-insights that they are seeing some promising potential, or we just have to wait and see?
Yeah, I think we have to wait and see.
Fair enough. So last question, how are you using this with your training as an athlete? I think you mentioned running is your focus. Is it something you're doing regularly? Have you kind of built it up to the top level and now you do it less regularly? Is it done right before you go into a training session, or do you try to create some space like you would a strength training workout before a run workout? What are some of the personal idiosyncrasies that you built into your training?
Yeah, I've played around with it some. I generally do it after other training sessions. I've done it a couple times right before a run, and especially when I was newer to the intervention, I could feel that my respiratory muscles were tired when I was running. If I would do it right before and then go run, I'd be like, ooh, breathing's a little more challenging than normal. So I spread it out from other, aerobic training sessions. I tend to focus on it more when I'm in heavy training blocks. So that's when I'm paying more attention, increasing the resistance. And then I'll usually take some time off after I've done a big event. But I've also tried out some other ways. There's a little bit of research out there showing that it could be a good warm-up if you do it at a lower intensity. So, you wouldn't want to do it at this lower intensity all the time. But, if you do a low intensity resisted breathing before a run, that might warm up the respiratory muscles and be beneficial for performance. So I did spend a summer in Colorado where I was doing a lot of mile races, and I was playing around with an inspiratory muscle warm-up. And I could tell one time I had it too high of an intensity and definitely was tired, but some other times it felt like it was helping me as a good way to be ready for that big breathing effort that was going to come from a mile race.
Yes.
So I played around with that a little bit. But otherwise, I think it's pretty simple. Like I said, just don't do it too close at a high intensity before an aerobic effort. And you can really fit it in any other time of the day when it's helpful, and just keep bringing that intensity up. There's been times I've done it twice a day as well and feel like that's been helpful. It certainly doesn't lead to overtraining or anything. I've never tried more than twice a day. So I don't know what happens then, but 2 times 30 breaths a day seems pretty good.
Love it. It's so fascinating. So keep us updated as further developments come to the forefront, but congrats on being on the leading edge with this. I think we're going to hear a lot more about this.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for your interest in our research.
You're placing your order now, aren't you? In all seriousness, we have zero connection with the Power Breathe company, except that I ordered one of their units at the standard price to try it out myself. But we will include a link to their site and the unit I ordered if you'd like to check into details yourself. As always, feel free to reach out to us with any questions about your current or future coaching career, results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or tap into additional health, wellness, and performance resources on their website, catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And now, it's time to be a catalyst. This is Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching. I will speak with you soon on another episode of the Coaching Lab podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.